Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're delving into the mechanics behind a successful investment fraud, specifically looking at the case of Ghazala Din, who managed to convince a victim from Preston to invest, I believe it was £8,000 back in July 2022.
Right.
And our central question really digs into how it worked operationally. Was the scam success primarily down to the extraordinary financial incentives being offered? Or was it more fundamentally built on Ghazala systematically exploiting existing social trust networks? I'll be arguing that at its core, those huge financial promises were the main operational driver.
And I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle. While, yes, the financial lure was obviously powerful, I'm going to argue that the essential factor for its success, the real foundation, was the sophisticated use of social capital and community trust. Without that groundwork, I just don't think those almost unbelievable financial claims would have been taken seriously at all.
Well, the evidence for the financial motivation seems pretty compelling to me. The victim, Sahiba, she explicitly described the prospects as exciting. And why? Because Ghazala wasn't vague. She offered 100% guarantees, promised to double and triple back the investments. There were even specific, very immediate bonuses mentioned, like getting $1,000 back almost instantly for putting $1,000 in, plus promises of monthly payouts and end-of-year returns. The sheer scale and the certainty, or perceived certainty anyway, of this return on, well, frankly, unverified houses, that seems designed specifically to overwhelm any natural skepticism.
That's a strong point about the excitement, but I think it kind of overlooks the bedrock requirement here: relational security. For me, the credibility wasn't really financial. It was established almost entirely through social engineering, wasn't it? Using those pre-existing community bonds to sort of bypass the normal critical checks people might make. The source material says the scam spread through a friend of a friend network. It relied on contacts who had already invested, building that social proof. And the victim herself pointed out the woman-to-woman aspect, saying, and I think this is quite telling, that one just doesn't expect Asian women to be conning people. That suggests a deep-seated expectation of trust within the community was actively leveraged, allowing her to suspend judgment.
Okay, I absolutely concede that the friend of a friend approach was necessary to get that initial contact, to secure the $8,000. But I'd frame the ongoing mechanism differently. The material makes it clear the goal was for victims to then find other people for her. Now, the incentive to participate in that kind of recruitment, which is inherently risky, surely only exists if the financial reward is overwhelmingly attractive. We're talking double, triple returns. So I see the financial structure not just as the initial hook, but as the engine, really, designed to keep that trust network expanding and self-perpetuating.
While I understand that view, I still believe the evidence points to trust being the absolute prerequisite, the thing that let everything else happen. It allowed the victim to ignore, a fundamental lack of basic information. She handed over £8,000 with literally no company name, no concrete details, just these vague references to houses in Bingo, wherever that is.
Right.
The investment could only feel secure because the security wasn't coming from business sense, it was coming from the relational source, that trusted community contact. The sheer absurdity of the supposed asset, these mystery houses, was made acceptable because the trust anchor was so strong.
Okay. Let's maybe pivot to the specifics of the appeal then. You mentioned the victim was in Preston, quite far from Birmingham, where Ghazala usually operated.
Exactly.
But couldn't that distance actually support my point?
How so?
Well, the fact that the investment was secured despite the distance suggests the power of the offer had to overcome geography. I'm not convinced distance proves relational bonds were prioritized over the offer. I'd argue the 100% guarantees were the real fuel here. Trust might have opened the door, yes, but the guarantee that the victim would get bonuses back almost immediately, sometimes even the same week the money went in, that's what made the investment feel secure and urgent, overcoming both the distance and the complete lack of proper vetting. It was the promise of that instant financial reward.
It's an interesting take that the guarantee bridged the distance. But I still come back to why that particular distant contact was made through that specific friend of a friend chain. It implies a deliberate navigation through the trust network, seeing those relational bonds as the necessary pathway regardless of geography. The guarantee might have sealed the deal, but the trusted path had to be walked first.
Ultimately, I suppose this case really highlights the complex interplay in these kinds of fraud. For me, though, the promise of extraordinary guaranteed financial gain, double, triple returns, immediate bonuses, that was the core operational driver. It's what maintained the momentum and ultimately overrode the victim's understandable skepticism.
And I would still maintain that the reliance on that friend of a friend structure, the leveraging of community identity, including that explicit woman-to-woman dynamic, was the absolutely essential foundation. It was the necessary prerequisite that made those unrealistic financial promises seem, even for a moment, believable. The money provided the, let's say, the gravitational pull, but it was the established social trust that set the path for it to work.
So, we're left considering, perhaps, which element truly drove the participation here. The undeniable allure of fast, significant wealth, or the perhaps more insidious betrayal of social capital and trust.
Precisely. A complex picture indeed.